Today, you're going to see me design and build a guitar I've never tried to make before, for arguably one of the most talented guitarists I know, all while trying not to get sued, and also learning some really hard lessons along the way. Will this guitar be worthy of a true rock star? Or will this project end up in the burn pile, along with my hopes and dreams? Stick around to find out. So first off, let's start with a little bit of backstory. Last year, Chris and I went to NAMM and met a bunch of incredible folks, including this guy, Dylan Adams. Immediately, we were blown away with how incredibly talented Dylan is, but also we were super impressed with just how nice he is. Seriously, he's a really likable dude. We started talking and hanging out, and we realized we're all of us from Florida, which we have in common. We all super love nerding out about guitar stuff. I don't know, man, whenever you meet someone that's talented and nice, you should do nice things for them. I just think more people should be like that. So we approached Dylan and said, we want to make you a guitar. You tell us what you want in your dream instrument and we'll just make it happen. And he said yes. Now, Chris and I don't really believe in having signed artists. That's just kind of not the way our business model works. That being said, our goal is to make Dylan a guitar that hopefully he will love so much he will never want to put down. What Dylan is looking for is a one pickup LP Junior style guitar. He wants it incredibly light, if we can do it, maybe make it under 7 pounds. He wants a Brazilian rosewood fretboard, an old school hardtail bridge. He also wants a classic sunburst with nickel hardware, and as an added goodie, he wants a micro switch that you can use to toggle between vintage and modern wiring, and we'll cover that some more later. Basically, this is going to be an ode to vintage instruments, but with some modern appointments. Us being Driftwood, you know, we might have to sneak in a couple other goodies just because, you know, go big or go home. I just want to take a second here to point out that this guitar roughly mimics a guitar that is produced by another much larger guitar company that is notoriously litigious. Seriously, it seems like you either die a luthier in this business or you live long enough that they send you a cease and desist letter. So technically, we're not making any money off this guitar, and we're going to be changing the headstock and making some other design changes, but out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to be speaking in code whenever I talk about this guitar throughout the video, in case any of their lawyers happen to be watching this. Okay, now it's time to start making some sawdust. So for Dylan's Le Pablo Pequeño, we asked him what type of wood he wanted for the top, and he said maple, which we loved. We asked him what type he wanted, whether he wanted curly or quilted, and he said he wanted just plain sugar maple. I'm not gonna lie, Chris and I, we love beautiful wood. What I'm trying to say is, I would have loved to slap some outrageously figured piece of maple on this guitar, but Dylan wanted something a lot more understated. And honestly, if you know Dylan, that just makes sense. As tasteful as his playing is, it'd be kind of weird if he had a master-grade, outrageously flamed piece of maple on top of it. Besides, we're going for an understated vintage vibe, and that's the type of wood this guitar would have had to make it affordable back in the 50s. So after a little coaxing with a hand plane and a sander, this top is ready to be joined together in woody matrimony. And what Type Bond has brought together, let no man tear apart. I really like using this jig from LMI, may they rest in peace, because as high-tech as this job can be, sometimes the best tool for the job is one that's existed for a really long time. I think that's kind of cool. Speaking of high-tech, we're going to head over to the shop's computer because I have a hot date with our CAD software. Dylan wanted the body of the guitar to be made out of mahogany, which I think is another great vintage choice, but if you've ever held a Better Call Paul Jr. before, you know they can be pretty heavy, so we have to put this guitar on a pretty strict diet. I have no real way of knowing scientifically if I can hit that 7-pound goal or not, so the best thing I can do is just chamber as much as I feel like I can get away with structurally and hope that Dylan is happy with the result. But when your guitar feels like it's made out of depleted uranium, it's no fun. Even shaving a couple pounds of weight will help make this guitar easier on his back and shoulders, so that's the goal here. Now I do want to take a second to talk about using the CNC machine. We get a fair number of comments from some armchair luthiers about this tool, and respectfully, I want to say first of all, thank you for commenting on our video. It really does force the algorithm to help our video reach many more people. But also, if us using a CNC machine is somehow offensive to you because it's cheating, that doesn't tell me you're a better luthier than me, even though you might be. It just tells me you've never used one of these machines. Seriously, I took an entire semester's worth of classes in college on how to design and make things on a machine like this, and I'm still not really good at it. It's an incredibly difficult tool to use, but incredibly powerful when it's used well. The accuracy and repeatability it brings to our work simply cannot be reproduced with most hand tools, and at the end of the day, Chris and I wake up and want to make the best guitars we can possibly make. So, we'll continue using our CNC machine, thanks. And anyways, I'm sure there was a generation of gatekeeping luthiers who said electric drills were cheating too when they first came out. But I digress. I've got the inside of the body carved out, so now it's time to glue the top on. And as Granny Miller always used to say, in God we trust, but in everything else we use Type Bond. I'm kidding, she never said that. But we will use a generous amount of the good goop here, and then I'll toss this heavy granite stone on top of it as kind of a call, because as Granny Miller always used to say, a good call should never be taken for granted. Tip your waiters, folks. After that sits overnight to cure, we'll start phase 2 of the CNC operation. And phase 2 is really fun because this is where this slab of wood really starts to look like a guitar. We're going to get the holes for the electronics, the pockets for the pickups, the pocket for the neck, and also the outline of the guitar. And now, you might say to yourself that this would be a good time to cut the channel for the binding on this guitar, and you'd technically be right, but we're actually going to try a technique we've never done before, and do a kind of a faux binding on this instrument where we scrape the paint back to expose the bare maple underneath. Lots of big guitar manufacturers do this, and honestly, I don't know why we haven't done it yet. Dylan is really excited for it though, and I think it'll be a really nice addition to the aesthetics of the finished instrument to help frame it out a little, so stick around and see what that looks like. Okay, so at this point, I'm really excited with how everything looks. All I need to do is cut the tabs that's holding this body into place. And I can tell I'm going to have to do a lot of sanding on this thing to get it ready for the paint booth, but that is life as a luthier, sanding. Alright, so next things next, let's talk about the neck. To quote Michael Scott, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious, and this is one place where the whole build could potentially go off the rails, so maybe it pays to have a little good luck ritual here. Like I said, this is my first time ever building a mess hall Windsor style guitar, so Chris and I double, triple, and quadruple checked our measurements on this when we were programming this neck blank to make sure that our scale length would match what Dylan asked for, and to make sure that all of the other things you have to consider, like the height of the fretboard and the angle of the neck, are all going to be kosher, because if any one of those things is off, this guitar could basically be a giant West Dahl pew chore sized paperweight. An eagle-eyed viewer might notice I'm actually making 2 neck blanks here, and that's mostly because I had the wood on hand to make 2, so, just on the off chance that anything bad happens to my neck during the rest of the build, I'll have a spare blank on hand. But also, what I'm secretly hoping is what a lot of luthiers maybe secretly hope when they get to build cool custom guitars for clients. It's that, maybe I might be able to make one of these Leslie Paulus IIs for myself sometime. That's, if I can find the time, but a guy can dream, right? Okay, so there are 2 more quick operations that need to be done on the CNC machine before we can move on. I'll use the CNC machine to carve channels for the dual-action StewMac hot rod truss rod that's going in there, as well as the carbon fiber rods that we'll use to reinforce the neck. These rods are a premium add-on and aren't standard in most factory guitars these days, but they add an incredible amount of stiffness to the neck, which helps add stability to the guitar's tuning, and I believe it also helps the guitar to resonate more. While we're here, we'll also rough out the final shape of the neck on the CNC machine too. The last thing I'll use the CNC machine for is carving out our fretboard. We offered some of our private stash of Brazilian rosewood to Dylan for this fretboard, and he of course said yes, because he has impeccable taste. We all agreed that the rich dark chocolate notes it'd bring aesthetically, as well as some added sonic benefits, were all must-haves for this build. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes the CNC machine can go a little rogue, or even worse, I can misplace a decimal while I'm programming it, and then you accidentally wind up damaging the wood to a place where it's not usable. This is always a consideration when using the machine, but it's especially on your mind when you're using wood that's as rare and venerated as Brazilian rosewood. Thankfully though, the machine did great with it, and I measured 3 times to cut once, so it all came out just fine. I think now is a good time in the video to humbly ask, if you've gotten any bit of enjoyment or value out of this video so far, we'd be really honored if you'd press the subscribe button and give us a like. Chris and I are getting really close to hitting 100,000 subscribers and our silver YouTube play button, which is huge, by the way, and our continued success on this YouTube channel helps ensure we can bring you content for many more years to come. And if you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. We really appreciate everyone in this community who's helped us. We've come so far already, and it wouldn't be possible without folks like you supporting us, so from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. The next step in the building process is gluing the fretboard onto the neck. This is done very carefully to make sure that everything is aligned, but yeah, we'll let that sit overnight so everything has a chance to cure, and we should be ready to rock and roll. Oh, but I do want to take 2 seconds to talk about this laminate. Somehow I lost the footage of this happening, but I'll explain what this is. This is generally a place of weakness in a lot of guitars, and many luthiers make a really good living fixing these headstock breaks when a guitar falls and hits the ground. Other luthiers will add something called a volute here to strengthen the area during the build process, but Chris's method for strengthening this area is adding this laminate to the back of the headstock. That, coupled with the 2 carbon fiber rods running through it, will ensure that if this guitar ever does fall off of a guitar stand, it should survive with only cosmetic damage. We went with maple here to match the top of the guitar, and Chris is planning to put a nice subtle burst on it to match, so it'll tie in nicely too. Alright, back to the build.
At this point, it's time that we start carving the neck, and you may have noticed that my voice sounds a little different, and that's because it's Chris here. Now, Matt is definitely capable of carving a neck completely by himself, but we decided to let me step in here and get this done so that we could get it done right and we could get it done quickly, and that's what you see me doing here. We're going to use our coarse rasp, and we're going to knock this neck down to get its initial shape carved into it, and then after that, we'll take some sandpaper and then sand it down to get it really nice and smooth. The initial carving process is pretty quick and easy most of the time. And once I have the main part of the neck carved, I can then move my attention over to the transition area of the headstock. And this is where you're going to see a really cool thing happen on that back strap that we glued to the back of the headstock. I'll carve that away with some different files and rasps, and what you slowly reveal is this beautiful little teardrop shape where that headstock overlay melts into the main part of the neck, and I just love this part of the carving process. After that, we'll spin the neck around and I can begin working on carving the heel transition area, and this part usually kicks my butt because we're dealing with a whole bunch of end grain on the wood, and that's just a lot harder to carve. So what I like to use is this pinwheel sander that you see in front of you. I actually got this from Grizzly years ago, and it makes quick work of it, but it's really easy to go too low, so I just have to be very, very careful that I don't make a low spot in the neck. And then I'll switch over to some hand files and slowly finesse this, just taking my time to make sure that it's really, really nice and smooth. Because if it's not perfectly smooth, you're definitely going to feel it with your hands. And the very last step is to lightly clamp on the neck to the body of the guitar so that I can work that transition area and make sure that it's absolutely smooth and there's no lumps whatsoever, so that when we actually go to glue this neck on, everything lines up absolutely perfect. I'm really happy with how everything turned out, so at this point I'm going to hand it back to Matt, and he can guide you through the rest of the journey.
So next, I went ahead and pressed some stainless steel frets into the fretboard using our drill press as an arbor. Now, it's time to talk about fret dressing. I'm going to use this StewMac fret beveling file to add a nice 45-degree bevel to the ends of the frets. Fret dressing as a whole is absolutely one of the more important elements in the guitar from a player's perspective, because if any of you have ever held a guitar with a bad fret job, it can be a ridiculously uncomfortable experience. Sharp fret edges that can catch your hand, frets that are uneven can cause buzzing. This is one of the times where Chris taught me that you have to absolutely be on your A game, and if you have a slightly obsessive personality like I do, it can be both aggravating and also intensely rewarding. Next, I'm going to use a fret leveling block from our friends over at Skyscraper Guitars to make sure there aren't any high spots. I pre-sanded the 12-inch radius into the fretboard and pre-bent these frets to a 12-inch radius, so while everything should already be pretty close to where it needs to be, this step still helps ensure everything is geometrically perfect. Only because I take this step super seriously, I'm going to double check everything with my trusty StewMac fret rocker to make sure that I don't have any high or low spots. Trust me, nothing is worse than getting a guitar to the finish line, putting strings on it to get it set up, and realizing you have a high fret somewhere. Oh, and I should have mentioned this sooner, but check and make sure your neck and truss rod are perfectly straight before you do this, so you don't accidentally sand a high or low spot into your neck. Okay, unfortunately leveling those frets in the last step left some flat spots on top, so I'm going to fix that by recrowning the frets with my StewMac offset diamond fret file. This will help all those flat frets get a nice, consistent, rounded top. If I didn't do this step, there'd be some serious intonation issues up the neck. Alright, I didn't get this part on camera, but I took a couple small pieces of 600 grit sandpaper and ran it across the frets to help take some of the more aggressive scratch marks out, and then I took the neck over to the buffing wheel. This is my favorite part of the whole process here because after all the hard work I put into getting these stainless steel frets where they need to be, this is where they finally start to shine. Literally. They'll go from being a dull burnish texture to an absolute mirror finish. Whenever Dylan decides to bend a string across the fret, it'll feel glassy smooth, kind of like skating on ice. Okay, confession time. I promised you some hard-earned lessons at the top of the video, and here's one now. I had all of the video recorded on the next couple steps in the process, included gluing the neck on and Chris spraying the burst and finish onto this guitar, but now I can't find it. And seriously, I've torn the shop apart looking for any errant SD cards, I've looked in every folder and external hard drive, and it's just gone. I'm also missing a 3/16 inch brad point drill bit. I kind of like to think they both ran off to Cancun together, now they're just down there sitting on a beach. But anyways, I'm going to make it up to you with a moment of incredible transparency. Ready for another hard-learned lesson? Well, the footage of me messing up the beautiful finish that Chris sprayed definitely didn't get lost, and I'm going to show it to you now.
I'm so mad at myself right now. So I did a thing that it just happens, like whenever you're sanding, but I'm going to show you guys here.
Yeah, the next step before you can get a mirror lake smooth finish on a guitar is you have to wet sand it, and you can see right there, I sanded through the finish. That is pure maple showing through.
And it's frustrating because I was chasing a low spot in the finish right here, and it's not exactly my first rodeo. I know what to look out for, so I would wet sand it, wipe it, spray it off, check. I'm using 1500 grit. Like it's one step above construction paper. That's what it feels like after it dulls out. Sand it, wipe, fine. Sand it, wipe. It's still low, but it's slowly getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Sand it, wipe, and then that happened. And listen, like stuff like this happens. It shouldn't happen to me. I should be better than this. But I know exactly what happened here too. Sanders tend to work very aggressively on hard edges, and I must have just, in my happy wet sanding zen moment, for a brief second let the sander dip down a little bit harder on one edge, and it just bit right through the polish. Excuse me, not the polish, the lacquer and the color. That's the worst part. The thing that really sucks is I'm gonna have to call Chris on this one, and that's a little bit like telling to mom and dad whenever you break something. I mean, he's super cool about it, don't get me wrong. It just sucks. Like, I take my job here very seriously. I love every minute of what I do, but mistakes cost time and money, and we're a small shop with, more often than not, we have incredibly thin margins. So even though this guitar is for a friend, Dylan, it's still just, physically, I need to be better about not making mistakes. Philosophically, I need to not beat myself up as much, but I've always done that all my life. That's a really hard thing for me. I'm gonna call Chris in here. He's in the office editing another video right now. I'm gonna call Chris in and confess my sins and see, but I'm not sure. I don't think there's a way to recover from this without respraying the top. And that also really sucks because Dylan really liked this color. And we'll be able to get it close, but bursts are like snowflakes. No two are exactly alike. So, you know, the next burst that goes on here will probably look a little bit different.
So lucky for Matt, this was actually an easy fix and I didn't have to redo the entire finish on the top. I was able to color match and fill that individual spot and blend it all back together, but I think Matt stumbled into something that was way more important than knowing how to use a DA sander for wet sanding. This is one of my favorite parts about guitar building actually. We're not just trying to learn things like woodworking, we're spending every day trying to make the best possible guitars that we can. And there's a mental discipline that you have to develop and a strong philosophical understanding of what it means to make a mistake, but not carry those mistakes with you for the rest of the build. And that's something that building guitars has taught us that we can use every day in our lives, and I think that's actually pretty beautiful.
Okay, and with that, our Les Claypool Jr. is finished. We're gonna talk about all the goodies here on this custom instrument, and then we're gonna weigh it and see if we got it under our 7-pound goal. First off, we have this Brazilian rosewood headstock overlay with a magnetic truss rod cover, Waverly high ratio tuners, cattlebone nut, stainless steel frets, Brazilian rosewood fretboard with a matching Brazilian rosewood pickguard. That's a bit of a flex. Beautiful classic sunburst. This custom humbucker that was hand wired by our good buddy David Edwards to the exact specs that Dylan asked for. Oh, David also built the wiring harness for this guitar. If you get a second, go subscribe to David Edwards' YouTube channel. He's trying to get to 1,000 subscribers, and if you're into anything at all, like electronics with instruments or even hi-fi stereos, he's giving away all of his knowledge for free. I'll have a link down below. Then there's this relic nickel hardtail bridge, volume and tone knob, as well as the mini switch for switching between modern and vintage wiring that Dylan asked for. This is a really cool little mod that will let him change how the capacitor that's hooked up to his tone pot will interact with his volume pot. Basically switching it between the input on the volume pot to the output on the volume pot. It's a beautifully specific little modification, but I'm glad that David Edwards was able to make it happen for Dylan. Oh, but the best part is how light this thing is. I can't wait to show you guys. You guys ready? Here we go. Boom! 6.3 pounds. The only thing left to do now is hop in the car and deliver this beauty. Thankfully, you guys don't have to sit in a vehicle for 5 hours like I do, so we can go ahead and skip to the part that I know we're all waiting for, hearing Dylan rock out on this thing. I want to give a quick thanks to Dylan. Dylan, if you're watching this, I hope you know that Chris and I wish you the best as you continue to grow as an artist and content creator, and we are humbly excited that this guitar might be a tool that you get to use on that journey. But even if it isn't, we're just glad to call you a friend. Thanks to David Edwards for his help with the pickup and the wiring, and thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna leave some affiliate links to the tools that we use in this video in the description below. If you guys wind up clicking those and buying something, a small portion of the proceeds from that will go towards helping to keep the lights on around here, and Chris and I really appreciate that. But without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Dylan Adams.